Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to the Placer County Local Area Agency Formation Commission meeting of June 14th. It is 4 p.m. And we'll get started with a call to order and a salute to the flag. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we're going to start with roll call. We do think we have two members that are going to join us remotely, but they haven't logged in yet, but we will go ahead and start the roll call.
All right. Commissioner Alpine?
Here.
Commissioner Burris? Commissioner Landon? Commissioner Mendonça?
Here.
Commissioner Rohan?
Here.
Commissioner Stevens? Commissioner Holmes?
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Carl? Alternate Commissioner Knisely?
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Spriggs?
Here.
And Chair Gustafson.
Here.
All right, you have a quorum.
Thank you. And because we have a new member joining us today as an alternate for the public seat, I thought we should go ahead and introduce Cherry Spriggs. We're happy to have you sitting as an alternate, and if you don't mind saying a couple words about your background. And I had the pleasure of interviewing her, and I think many of us know her, so.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and serving as the alternate public member. I live in Lincoln. I've lived in Placer County since 2001. Lived in Rockland and Roseville, but have been in Lincoln since 2009. I have a 12-year-old son who goes to 12 Bridges Middle School, and I served as the Lincoln Area Chamber President for 2 years and was on the Economic Development Commission for the city there, and have just been really involved in our community. So I look forward to being the alternate member to represent the public. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then I'll ask staff, do we have any changes to the agenda for today?
No changes from staff, Chair.
Okay, then I'd look for a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Thank you. And should we can just do all in favor on this since nobody's online. We'll just take a verbal vote then. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we'll move on to public comments, and we have quite a group in the public today. We're all wondering why you're all come. So we appreciate this. We'll open it up to public comment. You can speak to us for 3 minutes each. And as you know, we cannot take action on any items that come up in public comment today, but we're happy to consider your thoughts and hear your comments. And Albert, you'd like to go first, so we'll call you up. And then the rest of you let me know when you'd like to speak.
Good afternoon, Albert Shiver. So I didn't attend the last LAFCO meeting last month. I did watch it on TV. I thought I'd spare you. But I thought it was interesting. Mr. Chapman came up and asked a question as far as Village 5 goes as to how long it can sit on Ms. McIntyre's desk, not completed. And I thought the conversation that LAFCO Commission had after that was interesting. And so also frustrating because it's typical of how this project has been going. Village 5 has been in the process for like over 5 years now. If you count Planning Commission, it's probably pushing almost 6 years. We've had the CEQA lawsuit for over 5 years with them, and the city in that time has just continued to push forward, push. It doesn't matter what the court says, it doesn't matter what anybody else says, they just keep pushing it. That being said, as I stand here and speak, we're still waiting for the court to rule on some of the CEQA stuff, and yet it's still being pushed. to get approved. So very frustrating, and very frustrating to not know when stuff's gonna hit. And that's no criticism to Ms. McIntyre that, you know, I only get the agenda 4 or 5 days before your meeting. And so it's tough to rally the troops, I guess, if you will, to be here on time for that specific meeting when that does hit. Because when it's sitting on her desk, it can come at any time. And the city has shown, City of Lincoln, especially the city attorney has shown that it doesn't matter what it takes, whether it's legal or not. I'm referring to the island they created. They'll do whatever it takes to push this project through. And so I don't know if Ms. McIntyre is going to talk about it later or not, but it'd be nice to have an update on the illegal island. Maybe it's called Fantasy Island. I don't know. But there's people behind me that are, you know, here because they don't want to miss the boat. They don't want to be late to the game. And I'm glad they're here because I don't want you to think I'm the only one opposing this project. So that being said, thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, sorry, just a quick comment about the noticing. So we do notice 21 days the sphere of influence in a public hearing item. We notice it in the newspaper and also to the affected residents. So those who live within the proposal area and the surrounding 300-foot radius will receive a notice about 21 days before the public hearing.
And that's mandated.
Yes, so they'll get two. You know, there's the CKH notice, which is the 21 days, that's in the LAFCO law, and then the Brown Act, of course, is the 3 days posting of the agenda.
Well, that helps quite a bit, the 21 days. Would any of the rest of you like to say a few words? Come on up.
Truth be told, I'm here because I heard there was free air conditioning and did not disappoint. Quite comfortable here. So
And if you're not careful, stuff will fall down too. So.
sure. My name is Aaron Zambrana. Looks like I'm almost out of time. Dang. Okay, I'll see you. Just kidding. How do I reset that?
Oh, she's working on it right here.
Okay. So my name's Aaron Zambrana, and I live on Rockwell Lane, not too far from Albert. And I've been somewhat involved also in the proceedings with regards to Village 5. And there are a lot of concerns that I have regarding this project as well. When it came up to the Planning Commission and once again the City Council, we organized and reached out to many, many neighbors, not only on Rockwell Lane, but Nelson Lane, Nicholas Road, and there were many people that were very opposed to being annexed into the city of Lincoln. We organized a petition. This is the petition from that time, and I'd be happy to let you see. There are a lot of people that unfortunately have a day job and don't have time to be here. I've taken the time out to be here today. Albert is most definitely not the only one with concerns about this annexation. I'm not an attorney, but from what I understand, it is illegal, what they're doing. When we voiced opposition, they did the math and realized that they would not be able to pass this if it went to a vote with LAFCO. And in my opinion, I can't speak for motives, but I believe the city council and attorney decided that they would try a backdoor approach to this. And because they knew there were so many people on Rockwell Lane and Neighbor Lane that were vehemently opposed to this, they cut us out and said, okay, hey, we're going to annex everybody but you lucky guys on Rockwell Lane and Neighbor Lane. And we're going to leave you alone. But if you look at that carefully, you realize suddenly that if they annex all the surrounding properties around our little, island, what they're doing is they then have the numbers to get this to pass. And they're not allowing us to vote in the matter. They are disenfranchising us. And to me, that's definitely wrong. If they included us in the vote, they would lose, and they know that. And so they're trying to do a backdoor approach once they annex all the properties around us, many of which, again, not just on Rockwell and Lincoln, Rockwell Lane and Neighbor Lane, but many others in the surrounding areas. If they do that, then they know they have enough votes, and now we become an island, and then suddenly, in the blink of an eye, we're going to be annexed in because LAFCO does not allow an island. So it's a very cutesy backdoor approach to get their way without going through the proper channels. This is a great nation. We all pledged allegiance to the flag. I feel very strongly about that. We are a government for the people, by the people, not for just a few developers, not just, and this is what you're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. As this gets closer, you're going to see a lot of people coming in here expressing concerns again. And I just want to warn you that it will be very, very, very unpopular with the people in our area to annex us. Now, I'm not against the land developers. I understand there's a lot of money there, and I want them to be able to develop their houses. That's fine. But leave us alone. The people that don't annex their property. I don't see the point of annexing whole wide swaths. And I know there's reasons for it and all that stuff, and I'm not a lawyer, but yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments. Any of the rest of you like to make a comment? And we have one online, and then I'm going to close public comment. So if there's anyone else in the room, come up first, and then we'll go to the online. Good afternoon. Hi.
My name is Lauren. I live on Rockwell Lane, and
Sorry,
I'm out
we'll
of
fix
time.
that again. It started doing this yesterday. We burned it out yesterday, I think. We went till about 6 o'clock last night, so we had a long meeting.
So I live on Rockwell Lane as well, and I just want to piggyback on Aaron and what he was just saying about how a lot of us do have that fear that we are then going to become an island and we lose our vote. We lose our voice, we lose what we're able to say, what we're able to do, and then we're trapped. And I think a lot of us moved into that area for certain reasons, that we have the land, we have our ability to kind of do what we want, and we picked it because it is county property. And if we don't have a choice and we become city property, then a lot of things in our life can change. A lot of our financial situations can change, and things that go along with it that we don't have a choice in, and we may not be able to afford at that point. So this is our future and our livelihood, and it's taken out of our hands and put in somebody else's hands. And I mean, we're in America. We want to have the freedom and the choice to do what we want for our lives. And I think a big concern here is that we're losing that freedom, and we're here to do what we can to stop it, to keep our lives in our own hands. So please
Thank
listen
you.
to us. That's all I can say.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anyone else in the room? Raise your hands if you agree with the speakers. Okay, I thought so. Thank you. All right, then we'll go online. We have somebody online?
There's two now.
Or three.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Chris Chambers. I also am a resident of Rockwell Lane and adamantly oppose any possible annexation of Rockwell Lane and our surrounding areas into Village 5. Much for the same reasons that my neighbors have mentioned. My family moved to Rockwell Lane to take part of really having a country style of life, something that was a little bit slower, afforded my children an ability to really see things from a different standpoint of the city. All of the things that made Lincoln and the surrounding areas the great place that it is. I ask you to please humbly take into consideration our neighborhood's request to allow us a vote, allow us a voice, and keep us out of Village 5, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gina Morris, can you unmute?
Gina, can you unmute? Go
Am I
ahead.
unmuted?
Yes, go ahead. We
Oh,
can hear
very
you.
good.
Yeah.
I'm Regina Rockwell Morse. Oh, live on Rockwell Lane have lived here for 50 plus years. And Rockwell Lane gives you the community that people seek, kind of raise their families to live their life. We have a great neighborhood. Neighbor Lane is a great neighborhood. All of the neighbors around us, we're a good community. We certainly do not want to be a part of the city and would like not to be annexed. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. And the other hand went down. Wasn't there another hand?
There was.
Was there anyone else online that would like to address the commission? I'm not seeing any, so I'll close. Oh, you wanted to come up? Yes. Anyone else in the room want to speak? Okay, but let's make it quick. Go ahead and come up right up here so you can just jump up too.
Hi, my
Hi.
name is Michelle MacDonald, and I live on Dowd Road in Village 5. And I just want to say that I'm opposed to Rockwell Lane losing their vote on the annexation before or after they become an island. So even if they do become an island, I'm opposed to them losing their vote
Okay,
altogether.
great. Thank you.
So thanks for giving me just 2 more seconds. One other big concern that we had originally was the way this annexation is written, the plan is written, from what I understand, certain properties are designated open space, unable to be developed or changed. Well, guess what? My backyard is designated as open space, meaning I can't develop or do anything with it at any time ever again. I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's a major concern of mine. I don't understand how I can lose my property rights because some community that's being built needs a certain amount of designated open space in order to get that passed, and suddenly my property is taken for that purpose. If they wish to develop a property, great. Leave the open spaces on your property. Don't take my rights away by asking me to do that for you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so we'll close public comment now. Michelle, did you have any responses to the issues that you heard?
No, I do not, except you'll see later in my presentation that the item for Village 5, Village 7B, as well as the sphere of influence is tentatively scheduled for our August meeting. So we will be bringing that back for your consideration, and the residents within the proposal area will receive notices, as well as the surrounding areas. It's 300-foot radius, as I mentioned, and then we'll also post it online and in the paper. So hopefully we can give everyone as much notice as we can.
And if there's confusion about how somebody's property is designated, like the gentleman just raised, where do they go to find out that information?
So that would be the city.
Okay.
LAFCO does not have land use jurisdiction, powers, et cetera, so we cannot tell a city how to pre-zone. So
Okay.
that would be a question for the
So
city.
the question for the city on the open space. Okay. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll get to a couple other items that will impact you in a minute. So with that, we'll move to item number 5 on our agenda. This is a presentation from our LAFCO counsel, Michael Walker, and regarding the out-of-area service agreements and fire protection contract agreements.
Thank you, Chair Gufsis. And before I go on to do that, however, I do see that Commissioner Burris has joined us. At least I believe that's what that indicates. Is that correct, Amy? And so we would need for her to be able to participate in the meeting, we will need to have her explain briefly, 20 words or less, the good cause for her remote appearance, as well as to then identify anyone 18 years of age or older who was in the room with her. And then she would need to have her camera on going forward. So Commissioner Burris, if you could follow up with that.
Yes, I had both a medical appointment and childcare issues that prevented me from being in person today. So I'm using a good cause exception. There is nobody over the age of 18 with me, nor will there be for the duration of the meeting, and I will go ahead and turn on my camera.
All right, thank you. For the record, I am Michael Walker, your Commission's counsel, and my presentation today is on two sections of the Government Code sections 56133 and 56134, and for a minute I was excited that I had brought a crowd in for my presentation, but I guess it turns out they're here for something else. These two sections are part of what most of you are familiar with, and those of you who are new to the Commission will become familiar with, and that's the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Local Government Reorganization Act of 2000. And that's what we refer to in the LAFCO world as CKH for short, because the rest of that is a mouthful to say more than once. So these are two sections in CKH. And even though the act that I just mentioned has the year 2000 in it, one of these sections, 56133, has been in LAFCO law well prior to that. It was initially enacted in 1990. The other section, 56134, was recently enacted, relatively speaking, in 2015, and it went into effect and became operative on January 1 of 2016. And as I go through my presentation, you'll see how they interact. I have a PowerPoint presentation. Should I click on this to bring it up here? And the title of the presentation is Out of Area Service Agreements. And that's not a term you actually find in law, but it's what LAFCO professionals use to describe the situation where a city or district usually provides services outside of the city or district's boundaries. As we'll see with 56134, it can also apply to counties and state agencies that provide services outside of their boundaries. So that's what that shorthand language refers to. Backing up just to establish or remind you of your Commission's jurisdiction, this comes from a report that came out, it seems like yesterday, but on the 50th anniversary of LAFCO law in 2013, so we're now up to the 60th anniversary. But the state legislature, through one of its committees, issued a guide, kind of a reflection on the 50 years of LAFCO. And as I have up on the slide, it states that the legislature has exclusive power to regulate local government boundaries. But what the legislature has done, it has bestowed that authority on LAFCOs. So in essence, each LAFCO is a state agency. So the state legislature, instead of making one single state agency to govern boundaries throughout the state, created 58 of them, one in each county. And so no local government can unilaterally change its own boundaries. It's LAFCO that has the power to approve that, and subject to votes in certain circumstances, which that goes beyond the scope of this presentation. And also as part of that guide, it reminded LAFCOs that they serve as the legislature's watchdog. Again, another indication that you are in the nature of a state agency, not a local agency, even though the word local is in the name of your commission. And it sets forth three main purposes. That is, LAFCO law sets forth three main purposes for the commission. One, discourage urban sprawl. Two, encourage orderly governmental boundaries. And three, preserve open space and prime agricultural lands. So I highlighted the second one because that's what relates to these out-of-area service agreements where services are being provided outside of boundaries. And that's why LAFCO is brought in to supervise whether those services can be provided. Because again, the legislature has charged your commission with that authority to decide whether that should happen. That brings us to the first reference in CKH to the 56133, and it's a section that sets forth all of, or most of LAFCO's authorities, powers, and duties. And one of those, as it says here, is to authorize a city or district to provide new or extended services outside its jurisdictional boundaries pursuant to Section 56133. The important language there is repeated in 56133, so I'll go to that section before I unpack some of that language for you. So that brings us to Section 56133, and I'll interject, of course, if this is kind of in the nature of a tutorial. If you have any questions along the way, however, please interrupt. There will obviously be time at the end if you have questions then, but feel free to interrupt at any time. So 56133, the language is important, so I'm going to read this introductory clause, this introductory section or subdivision, I should say, to you. It's a city or district may provide new or extended services by contract or agreement outside its jurisdictional boundary only if it first requests and receives written approval from the commission, that would be the LAFCO commission, of the county in which the affected territory is located. Now, there are three phrases in there that I've highlighted that I want to talk about briefly. The first is a city or district. I just point out, you'll see that 56133 applies only to cities or districts, so services by cities or districts. I point that out because when we get to 56134, you'll see that the legislature has expanded your jurisdiction in the particular context of 56134, which involves fire protection services contracts. But 56133 itself is limited to services provided by cities or districts. The second phrase that I highlighted there is new or extended services. There has been some case law that tries to explain that, but it's mostly fact-based. But it clearly, the one thing we know it doesn't apply to is existing services. So it's when a city or district is going to provide a new service outside of its boundaries or is going to extend a service it's already providing outside of its boundaries. In either of those two circumstances, this section is triggered. I won't spend time on it now, but the usual difficult interpretation is what extended services means. What does it mean to extend services? And the simplest way to interpret that, and it seems to carry the day usually, is one of geography. If you're actually providing services in a physical area beyond where you previously provided it, that amounts to an extended service. But again, it's a fact-based determination. The final phrase that I highlighted here, I want to point out to you, is the one that says contract or agreement. For lawyers, we learn in interpreting statutes, and the courts have taught us this for several hundred years, you interpret a statute so that each word has meaning to it. And so what that means here is agreement isn't just another way to say contract. There must be something that the legislature meant by the word agreement that's different than contract. And the way that's explained in this section is this. First, I'll start with contract. A contract is an agreement between two or more parties. I use the word agreement there, all right? So it's, I'm defining, using a term to some extent, but a contract is an agreement between two or more parties where consideration is exchanged. So, it's usually a district says to a city, will you provide us these services? We'll pay you X. The city says, sure, we'll provide you those services if you pay us X. So consideration's flowing both ways. The city gets money, the district gets services, all right? And they do it and they agree to it mutually. That's a contract. An agreement, in this context can arise, and usually arises, where a city or district simply begins providing the service outside its boundaries with no agreement necessarily, no contract, that is, with the other agency. And there are a lot of good faith examples of violations of this section. As we go through, you'll see what the parameters of it are. Of violations of this section where a district provides maybe service just to an unincorporated area outside the boundaries of the district. All right? Without LAFCO approval, in most cases, that's not allowed. And one response from the district will be, I don't have a contract with the county to provide these services. I don't have a contract with, the city to provide these services inside the city boundaries or vice versa. But if the county isn't complaining about it, or if the district that's receiving these services from the city isn't complaining about it, it amounts to an agreement. They may be unspoken, but they haven't challenged it. They haven't said stop. And so that's why the word agreement is here, is to kind of cover that loophole that could be used to remove it from LAFCO's purview. So this is subdivision A of the section. So what it says is LAFCO approval is required, all right, for these out-of-agency service agreements or contracts. Subdivision B says the commission may authorize a city or district to provide new or extended services outside its jurisdictional boundary, but within its sphere of influence in anticipation of a later change of organization. Now I'll interject here to say that B and C, which we'll get to in a minute, have been interpreted by the courts to describe the only two times LAFCO can approve, or the only two circumstances under which LAFCO can approve an out-of-agency service agreement. So we go back, I assume I hit this one to go back. We go back to subdivision A, you don't read that, the court says you don't read that in a vacuum that says, well, LAFCO can approve it when it wants to, and then B stands alone as one example of when LAFCO can approve, and C stands alone as another example. The courts have said no. B and C are not examples. They are the limitation of LAFCO's authority to approve out-of-agency service agreements. So the first one is subdivision B, and I highlighted what is the defining distinction there, is it applies when services are going to be provided by a city or district outside its boundary but within its sphere. And as your commissioners know, you set the sphere, and so this is where a city or district can come to LAFCO for approval to provide services outside of its boundary but within its sphere. But the condition is that the commission would have to find, or as I'll describe later, it can be delegated to your executive officer, but either the commission or the executive officer would have to find that the services are being provided in anticipation of a later change of organization. And usually that's an annexation. The change of organization is a term of art under LAFCO law. It means that there's about a list of 13 different types of changes of organization. The most common one that comes up in this circumstance, of course, is annexation. And it may be, the situation I've seen in the past in advising another LAFCO is a city is providing services to an individual parcel, and they're going to provide it to a few others, and then they're going to just bring one annexation proposal instead of coming in to LAFCO, each parcel with an annexation proposal. And so they can come in and present to LAFCO this evidence. This we do intend to come in, so this is in anticipation of a later change of organization. And some LAFCOs will require, depending on the circumstances, that the property owner who's receiving this service, so using an example, it's a property in an unincorporated area, it's going to receive a service from a city. All right. The city may say, yes, we plan to bring a proposal to annex this property. Well, if the property owner doesn't agree with that, there may be a real hitch in that happening. And so some LAFCOs will require that property owner sign an agreement that says, if the city seeks to annex my property while I own it, I will consent to annexation. That's another way. It's questionable to what extent that's legally enforceable, but at least it helps LAFCO see that this is truly in anticipation of a later change of organization, in that case annexation. So that's subdivision B. That's the first of the two ways that LAFCO can approve an out-of-agency service agreement or contract. C is the other way. And this says the commission may authorize a city or district to provide new or extended services outside its jurisdictional boundary, that's exactly like subdivision B, and outside its sphere of influence to respond to an existing or impending threat to the health or safety of the public or the residents of the affected territory if two further requirements are met. One of those requirements is documentation. and that's the word used, so it's vague, and it leaves it up to LAFCO to determine what that means. Documentation of the actual threat to public health or safety, and then they have to show that the city or district has reached out to other potential service providers who could provide that service, if there are any. Usually there aren't. Right? So this one, as you can see from the highlighted language, applies when the service is being provided not only outside the city or district's jurisdictional boundaries, but also outside its sphere of influence. So those are the only two circumstances in which your commission can approve these. If it's the best reason in the world for a district or city to provide services outside of its sphere, you can't approve it unless it's a threat to public health or safety. All right? The commission wasn't given that authority by the legislature, so it's limited there. So if you find that there's not a threat to public health or safety, that ends that discussion. It's not allowed. Now, so in sum, then, under 56133, a LAFCO can authorize a city or district to provide services outside its boundaries, but only if, one, you find it's a new or extended service, it is by contract or agreement, and either it is within the city's or district's sphere and in anticipation of a later change of organization, or it is outside the city's sphere and in response to a threat to public health or safety. So that's the summary on 56133 with respect to, we'll get to exceptions in a minute, but with respect to what your authority is. I thought I'd point out, because it shows that the legislature, and this is mostly, I think, I don't want to say it's brought by Cal LAFCO per se, but it's certainly brought by active LAFCOs throughout the state who want to see if there's a way to add a third or fourth or fifth ground for LAFCOs in certain circumstances to approve these. So this is a statute, 56133.5, that was enacted just a couple of years ago. It's a pilot program for Napa and San Bernardino counties, and it enlarges that subdivision C1 I mentioned, where LAFCO can authorize an out-of-area service agreement outside of its jurisdictional boundary and outside of its sphere of influence. And here it's to support existing or planned uses involving public or private properties, subject to to a public hearing. There's more to that section. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that during our presentation today, but that opens a big window as what does it mean to support existing or planned uses, involving public or private properties. That's pretty broad. But I think it's the legislature's way of saying, hey, we'll try it. We'll see what what Napa and San Bernardino thinks that means, and we'll see how that plays out. I think, based on my experience advising one LAFCO in particular, but being involved with LAFCOs for a number of years, is there's varying degrees of opinion by LAFCOs throughout the state as to 56133 and its limitations, and whether those should be kept as they are or whether they should be expanded. I think the legislature has not wanted to weigh into that because there is such a difference of opinion among the counties. But it was willing to do this as really a way to collect information and study it to see if they'll consider adding or expanding the existing authority of the commission.
I do have a quick add. With my last LAFCO, we were able to have the legislature approve an exception so that we could extend services, or that the commission could allow the extension of services for sewer services to a development in the unincorporated area of the city, because it was outside the urban limit line, and so we did have to go through special legislation.
And I'm about ready to go through the exceptions to 56133 that are set out in statute. You won't see on my slides what Michelle just said, but that certainly is another legislation. You go to, or another exception, you go to the legislature and ask for new legislation for your specific project. But obviously that's very costly, time-consuming, and you have to get someone who's willing to take on that battle in the legislature if you're the city or the district. So 56133 does contain within itself a number of exceptions. And they're all set forth in a particular subdivision E. The first exception are when it's two or more public agencies. So here we're talking about public agencies providing services to each other, where the public service to be provided, not to each other, but one in place of another. So instead of what we've talked about normally, where a parcel is not receiving any services and the city reaches across its border and provides those services, this is a situation where it may be there is a district that is providing the service and the city reaches over to help that district out to provide those services. So an exception applies under those circumstances, but where it's an alternative to or substitute for public services already being provided by an existing public service provider, and where the level of service to be provided is consistent with the level of service contemplated by the existing service provider. So, again, depending on your facts, there can be nuances there. It's easy enough to say that this exception applies where, say, a district is providing a service, and for some reason they're unable to, whether it's infrastructure issues, whatever it may be, a city says, hey, we can come in and take over and provide that service for you. That would be an exception. It wouldn't have to come to LAFCO.
Chair, may I ask a question? Yes, absolutely. Can you give us an example of that, what you just said?
Well, trying to think.
Michelle, would that apply to Shady Glen? Because that's our exact situation.
Okay. So can you repeat that, Chair Burris? Oh, Shady Glen, okay.
Oh, Shady Glen.
That's what she said. Familiar with
so we have a current, I'm gonna call it a soft proposal on the table for the city of Colfax to take over sewer services for an area in our unincorporated sphere that has now determined that they can no longer provide their sewer services to their residents due to infrastructure issues. And so I'm wondering if that's an example of this exact exception scenario.
So my understanding, Commissioner Burrows, is that there is no special district in Shady Glen. It's a privately owned, and so what we're talking about here, I believe, is two public agencies.
That is correct. So if you took that example,
okay,
but said,
but
if you took that example but said the existing service provider was a special district, then that would fit this circumstance. The infrastructure has failed. Sometimes voters will vote down the fee increase, and there's not money in special district to do the maintenance and the upkeep it's required, and it may come a point where they don't have the money, and a city could come in if it wanted to. In the context of 56133 and provide those services and wouldn't have to come to LAFCO for approval, because it would just be replacing that existing service provider, providing those existing services. There may be other legal issues, but not 56133 issues.
So I think of Water District comes to mind, that if they couldn't provide the services, the Placer County Water Agency would be asked to come in and provide the service. Is that?
Yeah, that's what I was going to use as your example. Because
yes.
So let's say there's two public agencies, the special district, and then there's two special districts, and they abut, or they can provide the service to another one. That would probably qualify under this of here, where they would be able to provide the service to the other special district if the like a 218 failed or something else.
Yes, that's
without coming to LAFCO.
Yes, that's correct, and that example brings us to that second part where he says there is another occasion where it can get hazy. It's, say a stronger water agency, for instance, is coming in to take over. That stronger water agency couldn't provide more services than that existing provider provides, either is providing at that time or intended to provide. So there is a limitation on it, using that just as a hypothetical, not a specific instance. And that's where LAFCO would have to, where you would determine whether the exception applies. If the existing service provider had a failure of their equipment or whatever, or the ability to bring water in because of fiscal restrictions, you try to figure out what that service provider would have provided, and that would set the limit for what this other agency could provide coming in under this exception.
Just my experience in my past LAFCO is the commission would set limits so that it wouldn't induce growth.
Correct.
Yes, and that's kind of the term within the LAFCO world that you're looking at, you know. And that's the, you know, I put up the statute for the pilot project, you know, in San Bernardino and Napa counties, and you can look at that as saying, well, that could induce growth because it was so broad, public or private purposes. It's not limited to, doesn't, you know, exclude residential development. It doesn't carve out anything like that. And you could say, well, they could provide it and it may induce growth. 56133 is really that limitation, is we don't want, you know, the cart before the horse. You start providing the services before you actually have LAFCO approved boundaries for an existing city and a corporation of a new city, what the case may be. So that is, I think, the theory behind this limitation here. It's just supposed to be a replacement for that existing service provider, not provide more than that existing service provider intended to provide.
So would that limit the ability of that district that's failing to grow, to add customers?
Yes, as long as it's having another service provider, the city or special district provide the services, yes.
All right.
Yes.
Otherwise, has to go to LAFCO and, yeah, okay.
Yes. You'd have broader LAFCO issues there. You know, obviously, you know, LAFCO is concerned with service provision apart from 56133 and the ability of special district to provide needed services. So you'd have other concerns in addition to the 56133. And they, you know, if in this scenario you couldn't qualify under B or C, LAFCO wouldn't be able to approve it. You know, and that may be a special legislation circumstance. It may be, you know, a divestiture of a power in one district and a activation of a latent power in another district. It may be changing boundaries. All the other things that are on the table for LAFCOs to consider in the normal course of business. Another exception is the transfer of non-potable, non-treated water. So, you know, if your example includes, you know, potable water, we're back to the exception before that. If it's non-potable, non-treated water, that service is just excluded from 56133. The provision of surplus water to ag lands and facilities for projects that serve conservation purposes or that directly support ag industries. So that's another exception. This is the grandfather exception, an extended service that a city or district was providing on or before January 1, 2001. So if that service was already being provided at that point, LAFCO doesn't have any say. You can't come in and say, well, gee, we got to figure out, does it apply under, or can we approve it under subdivision B or subdivision C? It doesn't come to you. It's grandfathered in. And this, by the way, even though it seems like it was, you know, it was 22 years ago, that's a long time in some people's view, not that long in others. It is a date that's about 10 years after the original enactment of Section 56133. So it built in a lot of opportunity for cities and districts to get their acts together, and gave them a lot of grandfather time. You know, districts and cities have really been on notice of this since 1990. You know, it's a blessing of the legislature. They gave them through 2000 to be grandfathered in. A fifth exception is a local publicly owned electric utility providing electric services. There's more specificity in that section, but I won't take time today to go over that. And then the last exception that's written down in 56133 is a fire protection contract, as defined in Section 56134. And so I'll move on to talk about that section now, but I have one more slide on 56133, as I alluded to earlier. A LAFCO, there's a subdivision in 56133 that directly expressly authorizes a LAFCO to delegate approval of requests under 56133 to its executive officer. I point this out, one, just as a matter of information, and two, there is not a similar provision in 56134, which I'm about to talk about. And by the way, in my experience, I advised the Ventura County LAFCO for a number of years, and its commission has had in place a delegation of authority to its executive officer on 56133 contracts or agreements. But the delegation doesn't have to be exercised, as I'm not speaking out of turn here, as I advised the executive officer on more than one occasion. I said, if it's really controversial, you don't have to exercise that delegated authority. You can bring it to the commission.
Exactly.
Because sometimes, they're tough issues sometimes because there really is a need for a service to be provided in a certain area, and B and C don't fit. So moving to 56134, the opening section there defines what a fire protection contract is. And you'll see some language here that I highlighted that you can trace back to the start of 56133. So a fire protection contract is a contract or agreement for the exercise of new or extended fire protection services outside a public agency's jurisdictional boundaries, as authorized by certain statutes that authorize fire protection services to be provided in the first instance. That does either of the following, and I'll get to that either or here in a moment. But I want to highlight a couple of similarities and one distinction between this definition and 56133. As in 56133, this covers contracts or agreement, so that loophole is closed in this section as it was in 56133. It applies to, again, only new or extended fire protection services. And here the difference, though, is it refers to a public agency's jurisdictional boundaries, services provided outside a public agency's jurisdictional boundaries. 56133 only talked about cities and districts. And LAFCO law, CKH, defines public agency. And in CKH, public agency means the state or any state agency, board or commission, any city and county, which as we all know is San Francisco, any special district, or any agency, board, or commission of the city and county special district, joint powers authority, or other political subdivision. It's in essence, an all-encompassing definition of public agency, but most particularly for purposes of 56134, it includes any state agency and it includes any county. So 56133 doesn't apply to state agencies, doesn't apply to counties. This section, this definition, going back, talks about services being provided by a public agency outside its jurisdictional boundaries. So that would then include outside a county's jurisdictional boundaries, if a county's providing the service, or by a state agency. Under this context, CAL FIRE is really the state agency we're talking about, by CAL FIRE outside its jurisdictional boundaries. So we move to as I said, in defining what a fire protection contract is, it sets out those threshold requirements. Then it says that the contract must do either of the following. And A is transfers responsibility for providing services in more than 25% of the area within the jurisdictional boundaries of any public agency affected by the contract or agreement. So if it were to transfer, say, using a hypothetical, a fire district were to transfer to a city 20% of its responsibility, then this wouldn't be triggered. Okay. Now, as we'll see later, there's a cumulative effect, so you can't just chip away at it by just doing 5% at a time until you get up to 100%, and you never have to bother with 56134. So the legislature thought of that. But that's the first thing. So if it doesn't either on its own or cumulatively with other contracts or agreements, transfer more than 25% of the area, so that's it's the actual area, then this isn't triggered. If it does, then we're talking about a fire protection contract that's subject to this this section 56134. The other B, and again, this is either or. B is changes the employment status of more than 25% of the employees of any public agency affected by the contract or agreement. So that's the definition of a fire protection contract. If LAFCO staff or your commission goes through that and it doesn't equal whatever contract or agreement you're reviewing doesn't equal that, then it's not a fire protection contract. This section doesn't apply. But if it is, then this section applies.
Madam Chair.
Yes, I'm just expecting commissioners, please just jump in and ask, because I'm.
So our fire districts and fire departments have what's called an automatic aid. So do they have to have an agreement, or is it just
that's an excellent question. As far as I can tell from this section, it doesn't deal with the automatic aid because that's an emergency circumstance.
Oh, okay.
And so this is actually transferring responsibility, not just in an emergency, but transferring responsibility for fire protection services in that area. Okay. So it wasn't intended. I know it wasn't intended, but even reading the statute, I don't think you can get in there anything that indicates it has any effect at all on automatic aid agreements.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Good. Josh, did you have a question too?
No, I was just thinking of more of, let's say, a district had a physical boundary of a mountain or a bridge, and that bridge on the other side could be serviced and was less than 20% of the total district size. They can enter a contract of having another agency to provide service to that other side of the bridge, less than 20%, without having to come to LAFCO. I think it is what this is.
Yeah, and that's a good example because that's true in a number of counties. There's just that geographical limitation where if a service provider within that county had to provide it, it'd take them an hour and a half to get around and get there. And so I think that's where the 25% came into play to try to, probably generously, allow room that you don't affect any of those sorts of situations.
Yeah, or it would be easier to engage in a contract with someone else than to put another station per se, and equipment to service that 20%.
Yeah.
So.
This section here is the one I mentioned that is kind of the cumulative. This is the section that covers the cumulative where you can't just do 5% at a time all the way up to 100%. So it's a contract that by itself or in combination with other contracts would produce the results that we just went over, either 25% of the area, 25% of the employees.
Michael, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about this, but it's as of January 1st, 2016, so not going back forever.
Yes, that's correct. So if you piece this section together on the cumulative transfer of responsibility, it's any contract or agreement that's been put in place since 56134 became operative, which was January 1 of 2016. So it's in the nature of kind of a partial grandfather for any agreement that was already in place at that time. Then this section provides a number of procedural steps for LAFCO to consider. Let me just get on the right page here. But before we get to those, it has language that is very similar to 56133. It says, notwithstanding section 56133, so it takes us out of that, as we saw at the very end of the exceptions to 56133, a fire protection contract is accepted from it. This is just another way of saying that. A public agency may provide new or extended services pursuant to a fire protection contract only if it first requests and receives written approval from the commission in the affected county pursuant to these requirements that follow. And then we have some procedural requirements. 56133 really doesn't contain any procedural requirements, and that's, I think, primarily because the commission can delegate the authority to the executive officer to approve these. So it can be an informal process, doesn't necessarily have to be a formal process coming before the commission on Brown Act notice. But here, 56134, first the public agency, and again, a public agency is used here, so this covers a county or a state agency. A request by a public agency for commission approval of new or extended services provided pursuant to a fire protection contract shall be made by the adoption of a resolution of application. So a county board of supervisors would have to do that when the county is going to provide the services, a city council for a city, a board for a special district. For a state agency, it says the director of the agency. So just essentially it's a unilateral resolution by the director of the agency to satisfy that requirement. The resolution must be submitted to LAFCO with a plan that includes 10 enumerated categories of required information. Most of them are fiscal related, showing in essence who's going to pay for it, how's it going to be paid for. Some of the specifics are estimated cost to provide the new or extended services, estimated cost of the services to customers, potential fiscal impact to the customers of the existing providers, and then a plan for financing the exercise of services. That's the focus. There are 6 others that the plan would have to address for LAFCO purposes. And in addition to that plan, the applicant must also submit an independent fiscal analysis of the plan. So there's a lot of work to be done here by an applicant when 56134 applies. But what it tells you as a commission is the legislature wants the commission to make sure this is going to fly, since we're talking about fire protection services, and that you serve as the legislature's watchdog to make sure this is going to work. And so you come in really as, in that true legislative capacity, looking at this information and saying, is this going to work? Is this a good idea? But, in some cases, the independent fiscal analysis and the other fiscal information may not be as challenging as in others. For instance, if a county were to come in and provide services, taking over 100% of a small fire protection district, that may not cause much of a fiscal impact on the county. It's different when you have a smaller fire protection district taking over services of a larger fire services district. So fire protection district. So it can depend on the situation to what extent this analysis is complex or simple. Then when the application comes before LAFCO for determination, the legislature has put some of these in the negative. It says the commission shall not approve it unless the commission determines that the public agency will have sufficient revenues to carry out the exercise of the new or extended fire protection services outside its jurisdictional boundaries, subject to one exception that, here it is. Okay, good, because I was forgetting it really quickly. The one exception is where the commission has determined that the public agency will not have sufficient revenue to provide the proposed new or different functions or class of services. The commission may approve the application if it conditions its approval on the concurrent approval of sufficient revenue sources. That's a power that your commission has in connection with other changes of organization, annexations, incorporations, other things where you can say, well, we'll approve this on the condition this Prop 218 vote passes or some other financing comes into place. So here you could approve a fire protection contract even if you don't believe at the time there's sufficient revenue, but you approve it on the condition that certain specified revenue sources come to fruition. If they don't, then the approval, the services shall not be exercised based on statute. And then again, another negative, it says the commission shall not approve an application for approval of a fire protection contract unless it determines the proposed exercise of these services is consistent with the intent of CKH. I went through the nutshell intent in one of my first slides. Michelle mentioned another about, what encourages growth, what's growth inducing. All of that would come into play here. And so that's why I say that this section really brings in your commission's true legislative powers, where you look and see that does this fit with what your powers are, what you're charged to do by the legislature. And then we're almost done with this. Another one that's important is you shall not approve an application unless you determine the proposed affected territory is expected to receive revenues sufficient to provide public services and facilities and a reasonable reserve during the 3 fiscal years following the effective date of the contract. That ties back in with your fiscal analysis. And that's it. Now, I will say there's been no case law in 56134, so what I provided to you today is just based purely on a statutory analysis of it and how it works with 56133. In some counties, 56134 is not an issue. In your county here, it could be an issue. So open to any questions you may have, either now or after the presentation.
Okay, questions? I have a quick one. Jurisdictional boundary for the county.
Well, that's a good question. So, normally you think that, it's county-wide, the county, the entire county. But for instance, the county does not have certain jurisdictional authority within a city. Doesn't have certain jurisdictional authority within a special district. And so if it's reaching in to provide those services, so for instance, you could have a city that...
Even if it's invited in to provide those services, and is that then considered outside the jurisdictional boundary?
Yes. So in terms of that limited question, there are other issues that come up, of course, that exception of 56133 exception.
Michelle, I'm just following up on the contracts.
For one public service provider just helping out another public service provider. But yes, that's still outside, that would be outside the county's jurisdiction, because the county sheriff doesn't have jurisdiction to provide law enforcement services within a city that has its own police department.
But if
even though that's still within the county and the county's jurisdiction for other purposes,
Right.
mental health services, so some other social services, other things like that. So I think, but again, case law hasn't helped us out to figure out,
But if
what
it
does
was
this mean?
pre-existing of 2016, for instance, the sheriff has been the sheriff for Colfax and for Loomis for much longer than 2016.
Yes, and again, this only is for fire. Fortunately, we don't have to deal with it for law enforcement.
So you brought up sheriff. Okay,
but
so
if it were fire, it'd be
fire
the same
service
thing.
contracts
Yes.
need to come through.
Yeah, fire would
Okay.
be the same thing.
Clear. As clear as the state legislature ever is in anything that we're provided. So thank you. Any other questions? Any public comment on this item? Not seeing any, so we'll move on to our consent calendar. Thank you very much, Michael. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
Interpretations. I'm glad I don't do what you do.
Fun begins.
We're on to item 6 on our agenda. This is our consent calendar. We have 2 items, the minutes from our commission meeting from May 10th, 2023, and our financial reports, April 2023. Are there any questions on those items? Okay. I have a motion and a second. All those, we'll do a roll call because, yes.
Commissioner Burris's camera seemed to be malfunctioning, and she was in and out, and her microphone is on.
I'm sorry, somebody's microphone not on. I can hear speaking, but I can't hear it very loudly.
We can hear you now. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. I don't think I can hear the clerk.
Okay, what I'm saying is it seems like your camera is malfunctioning, and I thought that the rules were she had to be on camera the whole time to vote.
Yes, and we see you now, so the camera is working, so we're okay now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, then I'll ask Amy to call the roll on the vote.
All right. Commissioner Alpine?
Yes.
Commissioner Burris?
Yes.
Commissioner Mendonça?
Yes.
Commissioner Rohan?
Yes.
Alternate Commissioner Holmes?
Yes.
And Chair Gustafson.
Yes. Thank you. We'll move on to our public hearing. This is our final budget and work plan for fiscal year 2023-24. Michelle?
Thank you, Chair. So the final budget is identical to the proposed budget that the Commission adopted in April, which calls for an operating budget of $982,872 for the fiscal year. There are a couple of amendments to the work plan, and it was really just to switch out the financial audit for this fiscal year and postpone it to the following year so that we would be conducting audits biennially. I can never say that word correctly, but anyway, every single year will be audited. It's just that we will only have an audit report every 2 years for the Commission. And that the city of Roseville, since they have an interest in having a municipal service review and sphere of influence, they would like us to include their study on our work plan. So with that, I just wanted to very quickly go over, because this is exactly as you received in your packet, there's a number of studies and changes of reorganizations that are on our work plan. Some are ongoing, such as the fire protection districts, the study, as well as some reorganizations for fire protection districts that are ongoing and that are that remain incomplete. And then we have a number of projects for the city of Lincoln, including a sphere of influence and a reorganization, which I'll talk about later in my EO report, but that will be coming before the Commission tentatively at the August meeting. So we have some major administrative projects that we're tackling this year, and that's really the overhaul of our policies. You'll see a couple here that were a result of conversations the Commission had at the last meeting, but there's more to come. And then, of course, hiring an analyst position. We did receive a list from HR of 41 individuals who met the MQs. So it'll just be a matter of lowering that number a little bit to something that is more, it's easier to interview a dozen people instead of 41 people. But we did get a good pool of applicants, so we'll be working through that list here shortly. And then, of course, the new website. Currently, our website is with the county, and there are some limitations. So I'm not proposing that we completely remove from the county because our website, because there are some functions that are very helpful. For example, having our agenda and our meeting videos hosted by the county. It's very easy. It's a great way for the public to find it all in one location. But then we also need some supplemental information that's specific to LAFCO's needs that cannot currently be met. So we'll be working on that, and we'll be bringing it to you later during the fiscal year. Okay, so the staff recommendation is just to approve the final work plan and budget. And if you have any changes, please let us know. And then this is it's a roll call vote since it's a budget item.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
I have a question. Does the work plan, can the work plan be added to during the year?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, for example, I know that the other agencies are opening up general plan updates and other things like that, and that may require some of our staff time to go there. Should that be addressed now as a line item in the work plan?
No. We can take it up during the fiscal year. We've had instances where cities were not ready for, because it takes a lot of staff time for
Yeah.
them to respond to our request for information. They're not generating new information, but there's a lot of information that we request that isn't on their website. It's not readily available, and so they do have to provide that to us. And if there's staffing shortages, for example, what we saw with the city of Lincoln, pretty recently, we need to accommodate, we'd be able to accommodate their staffing situation. So we do amend as we need to. And we can, if you want, schedule a 6-month update so then it comes back at a set time as opposed to as needed.
I think that it's just more important, I think, to the commission to realize that the work plan can be amended during the year. This is not like, it's kind of like a proposed budget and then there's the final budget. As we are moving through the year, there's certain things that will, I'm sure, refocus or call need for staff time, and we could address it
Yep.
accordingly. It's just not set in stone. I just kind of like to make that point.
And also the budget is not set in stone. You can certainly appropriate more funds if we need it. During the fiscal year, it just takes a vote from the commission and a resolution. So the same thing with the work plan.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle, for the clarification.
Any other questions? Trinity, did you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions on this item, but thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, then we'll go to public comment. Oh, I'm sorry, Susan.
I do have one. Is that on?
It was. Go do it again. Yep, there you are.
Thank you. I did have a question about the timeline for policies. What is your plan? Are you still looking at doing an ad hoc committee of commissioners to work with you?
So I do have a policy that I've been working on for a couple of months for the municipal service reviews, because we do have several municipal MSRs coming. But my focus for the beginning of the fiscal year is really the city of Lincoln, the city of Rockland, the city of Roseville, and hiring a new person. And so I really don't anticipate being able to get to the bulk of the policies until winter, during the winter timeframe, just because we just have limited hours. But as I mentioned, I have a draft, a very rough draft, which I'll finalize before our July meeting for the municipal service review, because I think that needs to come ahead of all the other policies, since that is a major undertaking of this commission, sooner rather than later.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
Okay, then we'll go to public comment. Is there anyone in the public that would like to address this item? I'm not seeing anybody jump up to the microphone. Anybody online? Okay, then we're being asked to move approval. Thank you.
And I'll second.
All right. Commissioners Holmes and Alpine. And we'll do a roll call vote.
All right, Commissioner Alpine,
Yes.
Commissioner Burris,
Yes.
Commissioner Mendonça,
Yes.
Commissioner Rohan,
Yes.
Alternate Commissioner Holmes,
Aye.
and Chair Gustafson.
Aye. Thank you. With that, we'll move to item 8, our business items, and we have 4 business items to discuss today. We'll start with the general reserve policy.
As I mentioned in my last presentation, there were a couple of policies that the commission briefly discussed at the last meeting. One of them is a general reserve policy. I did contact several LAFCOs, and what the trend seemed to be that they established a reserve that runs anywhere from 20 to 33.3% of their operating budget. So I did choose 25%, somewhere in the middle of 20 and 33. But we do have approximately 30% that's available to us in both unassigned or assigned. So the staff recommendation is just to either adopt the policies with a 25% minimum, or if you would like to amend that percentage up or down, I can certainly, amend the policy, bring it back, and then a resolution to make those changes. So it would be appropriating the undesignated general fund balance that we have, and then just transferring the funds that we have from contingency into the general reserve policy.
Thank you, Michelle. Any questions or comments?
I have none.
Susan, did you? No. Okay. The only comment I might have is, unlike many other public agencies, we don't have mandated services that need to continue for very long. The reason for reserves is if the sky falls and there's, some shortage on the budget. So I like the 25%. I wouldn't want to go use all of the reserves. I think that gives you a quarter of a year of your budget to react and try to find additional funds or remedy the situation you're facing. So it seemed reasonable. I could see why the other LAFCOs had picked somewhere in that range. Gives you an adequate time, but not setting aside too much funding.
And it seemed that the uses for the reserve was generally for litigation.
Yeah.
To, defend.
Great.
Actually, bringing that up about litigation, Mike's actually here. What does litigation usually run in LAFCO?
Well, if you're in LA or San
what would
Francisco,
be an ample reserve?
Well, it's interesting. I was just having a discussion with someone in another county whose LAFCO was considering a litigation reserve. And I just recounted my experience in Ventura County. When I started advising the LAFCO there in 2010, it had a $100,000 litigation reserve that had been in place probably for at least 10 years. I'm pretty sure when it was put in place, that was a reasonable estimate of litigation fees for one lawsuit. By 2020, no. All that did, that was a reasonable amount to soften the blow to the LAFCO and the funding agencies when you had to go and ask for more money for litigation. As probably many of you know, to try to figure out the cost of litigation is difficult because it depends on how the other side acts. It's not just how LAFCO would handle the litigation. It's how the other parties are handling the litigation and how much attorney time is involved. But what I would say is, if a LAFCO wanted to soften a blow so that, a lawsuit wouldn't really have an immediate effect within a fiscal year, a $100,000 litigation reserve would do that. If you want a reserve that would cover an entire lawsuit, I think you'd be going up to at least $250,000 as a reserve. That would cover you, I think, in almost every case, because with litigation that LAFCO would be involved with, it wouldn't be like civil litigation where depositions are taken and that sort of interrogatories and that sort of thing. It would just be done on the record presented to the commission, and the decision the commission made in the usual case involving a LAFCO.
So my recommendation for future budgets, maybe having a litigation line item that is actually funded in the budget instead of relying on our reserves, our operating reserves, to be that cushion. Let it be kind of known to the board of what's in our reserves for possible litigation. I kind of view the
on top of this amount of reserves, or could we
Yeah.
reduce this amount and?
I think on top of it, it should just be part of the operating budget. I don't know what the rest of the board is, but it's maybe for future discussion.
Yeah.
But I'm perfectly fine where we are today, because I think, but when we look at a reserve, I was thinking of more of a general reserve if something comes up close, like a quick consolidation of two special districts, a quick MSR, a quick study, those are about 120,000, 100 and some thousand a pop.
Did you say quick?
Yeah, there's nothing quick about it, but it seems like it's quick to get the expenditure out. But those are what I look at as what would most likely happen in our reserves. And I think that legal services or having some type of thing should be just generally in our budget as an line item that people could see that we're adequately can enforce or protect our decisions.
So would you want to consider that policy and funding for the next budget year? So should I
Yes.
bring it back in April of 2024?
Yes, it's just something for the budget committee to bring back in the future, just point of future discussion.
Okay.
Okay. So would you like a motion?
Yes, please, and a roll call vote.
Okay, first off, is there any public comment on our general reserve policy? Okay, yes,
Madam Chair, I move staff's recommendation.
thank you. Okay. And then will you call the roll?
All right, Commissioner Alpine,
Yes.
Commissioner Burris,
Yes.
Commissioner Mendonça. Yes. Commissioner Rohan. Yes. Alternate Commissioner Holmes
Yes.
and Chair Gustafson.
Aye. We'll move on then to item,
Madam Chair, sorry. I have to leave for another meeting. I just want to make sure that there's enough, you have a quorum if there's anything that,
yep,
you're okay?
yeah,
All right.
except who's going to make the motions now?
Jeez,
Give me,
the way of the world.
He jumps in, he's a good one. Okay, we'll move to,
thank you.
Have a
thanks,
good evening.
thanks, Jim. 8B, application closure and withdrawal policy.
Yes, this was a result of the commission's discussion after the public comment at the last meeting. We do have some we have some incomplete applications that are in-house. There are progress being made to those applications, and so what this policy would cover are new applications, and they would have, the applicants would have 12 months, up to 12 months to provide the missing documentation or make substantial progress on their application before the executive officer closes their proposal, and then they would have to reapply. And also, and this is already allowed, but we're stating it in the policy that the applicants have until the commission makes a determination to recall or withdraw their application. And so staff's recommendation, if you don't have any changes, is to approve the application and withdrawal policy.
Thank you. Questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I actually really appreciate that you and your team did this so quickly, because I felt when that gentleman was here and asked the question, we didn't really actually have much of a concrete answer for him. So in reviewing this, I just wanted to thank you for getting on it, because I think it's really important. So thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Any other commissioner have comments or questions? Okay, then we'll open it up to the public. Any public comment on this? Not seeing any in the room. If you are online, raise your hand. I'm not seeing that, so I'll accept a motion.
Motion to accept the staff report?
Thank you. And then Amy, if you'll call the roll.
Commissioner Alpine,
Yes.
Commissioner Burris,
Yes.
Commissioner Mendonça. Yes. Commissioner Rohan
Yes.
and Chair Gustafson.
Aye. Thank you. We'll move on then to item 8C, Cal LAFCO Annual Conference.
So as we've discussed at the last couple of meetings, there's an annual conference in Monterey this year. So what we'd like from you today, if anyone knows if they could attend, to let us know, and also to from that list of attendees, if the commission could designate an alternate voting delegate for for the election, and if there's any member, our public members or our city members, alternates can run as well. If you're interested in running for the LAFCO Board of Directors, to please let us know.
It's got big. Don't embarrass yourself like I did last year.
So first item, is there anyone who knows that they can attend?
I can attend.
I can attend.
Okay.
I believe I already confirmed that.
Okay.
I'm gonna try to attend. I'm gonna say yes, I absolutely want to attend, but I might have a grandchild, so I don't know, so, you know, but.
They're
Oh, that's a
unpredictable
good
when they arrive.
I won't put myself as a voting person, but I would like to.
Okay.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
We can wait also to sign you up. I think there's a lot of time.
When's the deadline, Michelle?
I believe it's September
Okay.
13th.
I have one meeting I may try to move, because I really would like to go, and that's an easier one for me to get to.
I'm gonna go and set my board meeting.
Yeah. Okay.
So the voting delegates, Commissioners Rohan and Alpine.
Yes.
And you guys can arm wrestle.
I already know. I've already done the short end.
Okay.
I'm the alternate.
You're the alternate.
Okay.
And then Rohan is the voter.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And then we have time, but if anyone is interested in running for the board of directors, you can let us know now, or we can bring it back later.
Would you be interested? Maybe?
Maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Yay!
Okay.
Representing.
Okay, great. Okay.
Okay.
That's it, and we'll provide information as we receive them from LAFCO.
Are there any public comments on this item? Not seeing any. We'll move to item 8D, Executive Officers Report.
Hey, just wanted to give a couple of items, just some of our current activities. As I mentioned, I did get a list from HR with 41 applicants that met the minimum qualifications for our analyst position. It is an entry-level position, but they can promote to mid-level and senior level as time, and also as the commission. I think there's you have to have a year's experience to meet the mid-level, and also there's additional responsibilities that that the person would have to take on to meet that mid-level range. But it allows the commission to promote staff. And then as I mentioned earlier, I'm working on a municipal service review policy, because we do have several municipal service reviews that we will need to take on this year. And really the policy is just to, as we've discussed in the past, to allow more transparency, more public input. And so the proposed policy takes those into considerations. And then we'll be processing the Lincoln proposals. We do have the sphere of influence in Village 5 and Village 7 that we are hoping will be ready for August. That is our goal. And then there's an application for the half-acre island, if you will, that was created as part of the SEDB NAQ. We have that proposal, and that will need a tax sharing agreement between the city and the county. So I do not have a date, but hopefully sooner rather than later. And then, as I mentioned, the municipal service review for the city of Rockland, as well as their unincorporated island annexation. That's something that we're actively working on. In fact, I had a meeting today and have meetings in the rest of this week and next week to go over these items. And then Amy's handling all of the office. She's our office manager guru. So she's closing all of the fiscal year, which is a ton of paperwork, and I feel sorry for her, but there's a lot of contracts, et cetera, that will need to be closed out, rolled over, and she's handling that, as well as ordering equipment for the new employee and setting up the office. We recently received a desk, for example, but we're waiting on a chair. So all of these moving pieces that poor Amy is working on. And so that's our activities since we last saw you. And if you have any questions on other projects not listed here, I'm happy to answer them.
I had
Yes.
a question.
Okay.
We had talked previously after the last meeting, so we're sure Rockland's ready to go, because there was discussion that Roseville would go first, and I know I talked to our city manager about that, and I just want to kind of manage expectations. Are we going to jump, or is Rockland going to be ready to go?
Rockland, I did meet with them, and they asked if they could go first because of their staffing. They're finalizing a project, and then they will have more time in the beginning of the fiscal year as opposed to the middle of the fiscal year to respond to our request for information. I have a meeting with the Roseville city manager, I believe it's Monday, just to go over the timeline a little bit more now that I've had that conversation with Rockland.
Just wanted to check in. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions from the commission?
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
So the MSR policy that you're talking about for July, right?
Yes.
I just want to make sure I'm getting this and I'm understanding this. That will be something that we're working on, but that's not going to apply to anything that's going to be in front of us, right? Like that's going to be for anything that's coming in and you know where I'm going with this because I said in my interview how important I thought those were. So just want to kind of understand like the timing on that.
So with the policy as it's currently drafted, and like I said, it's in a very rough draft form, what I was addressing was the commission's concern about we provide noticing for all of these projects, right? As I mentioned, the newspaper, our website, the county's website, the city's website, et cetera. But it seems like we don't get a lot of public participation. And so what I was looking at in the policy is how can we expand our audience?
Okay.
Right, and so yes, it will apply to.
I see what you're
current.
saying. Yeah, I got it. Okay.
Yeah, and so Lincoln, we've already done that and that's closed. But for these other ones that are coming with even the fire MSR, it'll affect that because it's. I divided it into 3 sections, right? At the beginning, when we're working with the city or the special district on an RFP, the middle section when the commission is taking action, and then the end, what happens post annexation, and distributing it. So at least that's how I see it, and the commission you'll be able to tell me something else, to do something else. But it was really, I was reacting to, just to make sure that we are very transparent and that it's easily accessible for the public.
Okay. It's almost like it seems like kind of concurrently a little bit.
Right.
Okay.
Great. Any other comments or questions? I would just add that I wanted to echo what Sherry said earlier, that we talk about a policy at one meeting, you come back and deliver at the next meeting 2 policies for us, and I just so appreciate that. I know you have lots on your plate, lots of work to do, cleaning up a lot of years of neglect in the office, and I just so appreciate how quickly you're able to respond to our comments in our response to the public. So thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Yep. Any members of the public wish to address this item on the executive officer's report? Then we'll move on to item number 9, commissioner comments. Do any commissioners have any comments? Any further ones, Trinity? Obviously,
No, I have none.
From my first meeting as chair, I've really extended our meeting much longer, but it was really the attorney's fault because that's how that goes. So with that, is there any final public comment? Not seeing any. Thank you for being here today. We stand adjourned.
Great meeting. Thank you, guys.